The International Monetary Fund is warning the global economy is at risk of recession if the war in the Middle East continues and these high energy prices persist. The conflict is having a huge impact on Australia's economy as the government prepares for next month's budget. Now, Luci Ellis is the chief economist at Westpac and joins us now. Luci Ellis, thank you for your time. Firstly, this IMF outlook, what are the key impacts it's warning of and what really stood out for you in that?
Thanks, Gemma. Great to be here. This is the IMF's regular forecast publication. And in many ways, I think the interesting thing coming out from it was the fact that they publish different scenarios that reflects the uncertainty that we're experiencing in the world at the moment, and that key uncertainty of, at what point does the Strait of Hormuz reopen fully and how quickly does energy supply recover. They have some quite extreme scenarios in terms of prices staying high for a really long time. The numbers that we're looking at in our own forecasts are more, an 8-week closure of the Strait of Hormuz and then a slow reopening from there. And so I think thinking through how those different scenarios might play out is exactly, what the IMF can help governments with, thinking those scenarios through at this stage. I think that was a really key element to this particular iteration of what is a regular publication.
And what were the specifics there for Australia and our relative impact with this?
Well, I think the IMF does attempt to build up forecasts for each individual country, and they have, had the war not happened, they would have actually upgraded their global growth forecasts. And so this is now a higher inflation, lower growth scenario, and that's true for their Australian forecasts. And that's what we've got in our forecasts as well, and what most other forecasters, the Australian economy, will be seeing. Some particular issues for Australia are that while it's a negative income shock for most consumers as they're contending with higher prices, for the economy as a whole, we do get that extra tax revenue from energy exports, and we can do those gas for oil deals that the government's already doing. So it's a somewhat more nuanced picture for Australia, but for the consumer, it is a very big hit.
The IMF is warning against these broad brushstroke measures, wants more targeted approaches in governments, helping out citizens. So, in Australia, we've had that cut or half cut to the fuel excise. How does that stack up as a measure?
And Australia's not the only country that's done that. We also saw headlines that Canada has announced something similar. And it's an understandable response, given that if you think that petrol prices aren't going to stay really high for a while, it's a hit you can take, and therefore reduce the impact on households and businesses for that matter, if you think it's going to be a temporary shock. And that was something that governments also did, European governments in particular, with electricity prices and gas prices when Russia invaded Ukraine. So it's a common measure. But the reason the IMF is concerned is because in the end, if you've had a reduction in supply, you need to meet that with lower demand. And economics will tell you that the way that you induce lower demand is by having that high price and inducing people to economise on it. We see this in our own banking data here at Westpac, where we see more people are using public transport. People initially topped up their petrol tanks more frequently and then pulled back on that. So people are making decisions day to day that reduce their own demand for fuel, and that's what higher prices do. So the reason the IMF is saying this is the maxim that the cure for higher prices is higher prices. By having those higher prices, you induce the reduction in demand that is going to be necessary globally in order to meet that lower supply. But that's true for while ever the Strait of Hormuz is closed. And it is going to be so disruptive to so many non-combatant countries that we see, huge pressure to get traffic through Persian Gulf normalising or near normalising as soon as possible.
Yes, it's this balancing act for the government, trying to help households but not drive up inflation, and this is all now having to be factored into the May budget.
That's absolutely right. Australia entered into this conflict, or we're not in the conflict, but we've started this period as a country that already had growth picking up and inflation was too high for the Reserve Bank's liking. So a lot of people would interpret this as being the economy was already too hot, and for that reason they will be expecting that any further stimulus would just make the inflation problem even worse. That's what people are going to be focused on.
And there's a lot of uncertainty. Where are you at with predictions of rate rises this year?
Well, it gives me no pleasure to forecast 3 more rate hikes. As I mentioned, Australia already started this period with inflation above the Reserve Bank's target. The Reserve Bank's been very clear that it sees getting inflation back into its 2 to 3% target range and back to that 2.5% midpoint as job number 1. And the communication that they have been putting out over the last weeks and months has been they see that the Australian economy actually does need to slow, and that consumption and business investment do need to moderate in order to make room for what is a constrained supply. We've also been quite alarmed by the number of other prices beyond petrol that are already starting to increase, and that's something we're watching very closely in thinking about the near-term inflation outlook, and I'm sure the Reserve Bank is doing the same.